As cholesterol.
The Pepsi Challenge in New York,
I chose Pepsi.
Detroit,
The Pepsi.
Flint,
Pepsi Cola.
Grand Rapids, New Orleans,
Pepsi Cola.
Dallas,
Pepsi.
San Antonio,
Pepsi.
Houston,
Pepsi.
Los Angeles,
Pepsi Cola.
Corpus Christi.
Pepsi.
It's a fact. Nationwide, more people prefer Pepsi over Coca-Cola.
It's got more of a to it.
Let your taste decide. Take the Pepsi Challenge.
You're watching WNGE-TV Channel 2, Nashville.
ABC News live coverage of Inauguration 81 continues. This portion brought to you by Ford and your local Ford dealer, who invites you to test drive the new 1981 Ford cars and trucks, including Escort, the new World Car from Ford, the World Car Company.
We're back here at the White House, where any moment the president and president-elect will come out. Jimmy Carter will be riding with Ronald Reagan, and Rosalind Carter with Nancy Reagan. And here they are at the White House. Susan King. Describe.
Yes, as you see, Mr. Mondale and President-elect George Bush have just walked down the stairs. Their wives came out just a few minutes earlier. They will be riding up in a separate car. The vice president and the vice president-elect will be riding in their car. You know, they had juice and coffee and pastries, but it looked like there were a lot of picture-taking going on in the green room, where they've all been waiting the last 20 minutes, along with the principals, of course, with the two members who have organized this inauguration, Charles Wick and Ed Gray. They're Mr. Reagan's co-chairman of this most impressive inauguration. There's a flurry of activity. That's how we can usually tell something is going on. The aides have been scampering about in the last few moments. Next, we expect to see, of course, Mrs. Carter, First Lady, and Mrs. Reagan. They seem to be spacing the time as they each walk out. It is all very organized here, as you might expect. Protocol is called in time. Each come down. They're not stopping as they do come out. On the way in, for those of you who might have just tuned in, as the president and the president-elect stood together and waved to photographers, we asked if there was any momentous announcement, and Mr. Carter smiled and said only that he thought the new inhabitants would enjoy the White House. Barbara?
As I understand it now, it was mostly small talk. Did you have any word at all, Susan? Did they talk about the hostages? Anyone give you any idea of what went on inside?
No,
just pastry and coffee.
That's right, Barbara. No one, of course, who was in that group would come over to us. I saw Mike Deaver, who is Mr. Reagan's assistant, has been with him for years, and he smiled and walked the other way when I gave him a yell. They have not indicated anything. And both Mr. Bush and Mr. Mondale, as you saw, skirted away from us pretty quickly.
Robert Gray and Charles Wick. Charles Wick, a very close friend of Ronald Reagan's, who was the two coordinators of this whole event. And Charles Wick told us that at the parade he had stood in for Ronald Reagan. It was the most thrilling moment of his life. Even to be a substitute president, that must be kind of fun. Frank, what do you think of the festivities? You've watched a lot of inaugurations come and go.
Yes, Barbara, and I must say that this one is so different, so different. Not only is Jimmy Carter in the unique position of being voted out of office after only one term, but here is Ronald Reagan, who came to fame as an actor and then established his legitimacy as an executive and administrator by becoming governor of California. And over all this is the tremendous drama of the release of the hostages in Iran. I want to repeat just once more time as we watch everybody scurrying out here in anticipation of them. The unconfirmed report, here they come. The unconfirmed report we have had that one of the planes bearing the hostages, we believe bearing the hostages, has taken off from Mehrabad Airport in Iran. We simply cannot repeat that too often, but it is an unconfirmed report. We can't say for certain that the hostages were on board. But we'll
and you know, Frank, that when we talk about the hostages, and it may very well be this situation that robbed Jimmy Carter of his election, hoping weeks and weeks ago that what is happening today might have happened perhaps in October. The significance of it, the symbolism of it, the irony of it, so many different things that we can,
well,
say.
Here they are now.
Is there any word about the hostages? Have they taken off?
Susan?
Any word from the hostages?
Well, what we have, Susan, is a report, and it's a wire service report. I believe we're not able to confirm it as yet, independently, that one of the planes, the Algerian airline planes, has taken off and we understand the other was at the end of the runway, lights blinking, the lights on at the airport. It's dark in Iran right now, but we have that report that one is taken off. We're unable to say flatly what we are so longing to say, that they're airborne and gone, but it certainly looks that way.
Frank?
Okay. Well, now we have the president and the president-elect in the car. Riding with them, Senator Hatfield and Speaker O'Neill. You saw Mrs. Carter and Mrs. Reagan come out first. They will be in the second automobile with Representative John Rhodes, the retiring minority leader of the House. He's not retiring from the Congress, but he's retiring from his post as minority leader. And Senator Byrd, who is involuntarily retiring from his post as Senate Majority Leader. He becomes minority leader in the Senate. Not too much concern about his tenure as a member of that august body. I don't think they even ran anybody against him the last time he was up for election in West Virginia.
You know, Frank, what's interesting about these rides, these men today, Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter, probably are discussing with a greater degree of cordiality matters, the Iranian hostages, other matters, than a lot of presidents have. When Herbert Hoover and Franklin D. Roosevelt rode up, it was a chilly ride, metaphorically speaking, because Hoover tried to get Roosevelt involved before the inauguration, which was then in March, and Roosevelt said, no, thank you. But perhaps the chilliest one was between Harry Truman and Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1952, and the report was that President Truman asked President-elect Eisenhower, do you still want that plane that's available, referring to Ike's line, if elected, I will fly to Korea.
Oh, that was the other line that was reported, too, when Eisenhower was reportedly miffed to learn that his son John had been brought back from Korea, and he inquired, I believe the language as reported was, who is the damned fool who brought my son back from Korea? That makes me look bad. And Truman is supposed to have just glanced out the window and said, the president. And of course at that time he was still the president. Let's go back now to Barbara. Oh, we're going to go to Bettina Gregory, who has a good view of these motorcade. Bettina?
Frank, the motorcade is just beginning to pass us by here at 15th and Pennsylvania Avenue. We are standing right across the street from the Treasury building as hordes of policemen, many of them on motorcycles with sidecars, are now passing by. We can see the flashing lights on top of the cars directly in front of the cars bearing President Carter, President-elect Reagan, Vice President Mondale, and Vice President-elect Bush up to the Capitol. Many of the spectators here are from out of town, of course. I'm standing with a group of people from Missouri who have come up with the Willard, Missouri High School Marching Band, and many of these people are wearing yellow ribbons. They are wearing them, of course, for the hostages, and in this case, one particular hostage that comes from Missouri. We can see the motorcade moving a little bit closer towards us. It is just nearing the corner here. It is symbolic that they are passing by the Treasury building, which was so significant in the negotiations which went on all night long. Of course, Treasury Secretary Miller had opened phone lines to Algiers. The first limousine is just approaching the corner. It is about to round the corner. The people here are waving American flags. Many of the flags, in fact, are decked with yellow ribbons. You can see Reagan is waving to the people greeting him. People are applauding as he goes by. Here we see the second limousine just turning the corner right now. The limousine's moving slowly up to the Capitol as they begin this procession. It's a fairly gray day here, one that, of course, is overshadowed by the news that overshadows this whole event, and that is the unresolved nature. Everybody on the street is asking, what about the hostages? They are worried and concerned. The motorcade passing by now, the last limousine rounding the corner. We can see the people waving to the president and vice president as they round the corner. And now back to you, Barbara.
And you know, Bettina, it is an odd time in another way. Usually at times like this is a clear break between the president and the president-elect. The president-elect team all goes home, the new team moves in, and yet we have now a kind of transitional cooperation because some of the old members of the Carter regime, the Carter period, are going to stay on to help in the transition period about the hostages and cooperate with the Reagan people. And now back to Frank at the Capitol awaiting the president-elect.
All right, Barbara, they are not here yet, so let's go right now back to our news headquarters here in Washington, and Ted Koppel with some late word on the hostages. Ted?
Thank you, Frank. This is now a tale of four cities, not only Washington, but also Tehran, Algiers, and of course Frankfurt, Germany. And the time difference and the weather conditions are beginning to play a factor. It is, of course, now nighttime in Tehran. There was some question as to whether the planes could even take off at night, because, of course, Iran and Iraq are still at war. Bad weather earlier today in Frankfurt, Germany. That apparently seems to be clearing up. But for the very latest details on what is happening now, let's go to Peter Jennings at our desk in Frankfurt. Peter?
Ted, I think the very latest weekend report, we just reported a moment ago to you that one of the Algerian 727s did take off from Mehrabad Airport, but we didn't know whether or not the hostages were actually on that. We knew they were at the airport in the VIP lounge. Now an official of PARJ, the official Iranian news agency, has just said that the departure of the hostages is imminent. So that is the closest we have had to an official word in the last little while. We know that the second Algerian 727 is prepared to take off. We know that the Medivac aircraft here at Frankfurt Airport have not taken off. But to repeat that announcement, the PARS news agency, or at least an official of it now, says that the departure of the hostages is imminent. Ted?
Peter, I don't want to throw a curve at you, but we do need to know, how long does it take to fly from Tehran to Algiers? I mean, how many hours will we be waiting before we actually see the hostages?
My recollection in Ted that flying time from Tehran to Algiers is about 5 hours. From Algiers to Frankfurt here to Rheinland Air Force Base is about 3 to 3.5 hours. So before, you're quite right, it's a tale of four cities, and we have a terrible time figuring out all the different time zones. But it will be quite late in the evening Algiers time, and if they then made that 90-minute stop that we have been told they will make and then come on here, it will be very early in the morning, Frankfurt time, when they get here. Can I just check for a second?
Go ahead, take a look down. I saw someone handing you the coffee there.
The Iranian news agency PARS now reports at 11 a.m. Eastern time, your time, that the American hostages would fly out of Tehran in the next half hour. So, as one of you said in Washington some hours ago, not on this network, I might add, it is now definitely getting, it appears to be a matter of minutes.
All right, Peter, thank you very much indeed. And once again, we will, of course, be returning to Peter Jennings as soon as events warrant. But at the moment, events here in Washington seem to be taking up most of our attention, and indeed should be. So let's go back now to Frank Reynolds on Capitol Hill.
Thank you, Ted. The motorcade is moving up Pennsylvania Avenue now. They're still quite some distance away from Capitol Hill. Just going by the Justice Department, I believe. And moving at a fairly good clip as far as presidential motorcades go. Ceremonial motorcades such as this one, they'll go much slower, of course, when they actually make the reverse journey, because then the President and Mrs. Reagan will be visible and will be, of course, greeting the throngs lining the sidewalks. Behind me here on the President's platform on the west front of the Capitol, you see now the crowd has really gathered. Those to the right of your picture are members of the House of Representatives, because that is the House side of this Capitol. The other side belongs to the Senate, and they're over there now. The Senate and the House both out on the platform waiting the arrival of the President and the President-elect. Our coverage of Inauguration 81 continues in a moment.
Mustang. The sky's the limit for 1981. Now Mustangs available with a rakish new T-roof. Mustang, born to run with the wind, sure-footed to handle quick turns. Mustang, a world of high gas mileage you might not expect from such a high-spirited car. Mustang! Capture a Mustang, America's most popular sports car.
Now 12% annual percentage rate financing at your participating Ford dealer.
Hey, what's that? Bursting with great taste. Surprise, Henry. It's Cycle dog food. New Cycle, a delicious new mixture of red, brown, and golden nuggets. Oh, don't worry, Henry. Cycle still has just the right nutrition for your stage of life. But now it's bursting with a great new taste you'll love. Uh-oh, you missed a piece. New Cycle, bursting with a great new taste.
Well, here is the motorcade coming along merrily up to Capitol Hill. I believe they have now passed the point where Constitution Avenue more or less merges with Pennsylvania Avenue, moving along, as you can see, at a fairly rapid clip. They have no time to waste because there is a precise schedule to be kept. You can see some people running across the enclosure. That's where the citizens are allowed to be. So there still must be some, I mean the ordinary people who don't have tickets to get up reasonably close to the president's platform. So they must still be some distance away. They'll come in actually and go onto the East Plaza of the Capitol building, where the inaugurations have been held for so many years. The other day, the question was finally put to the Capitol architect, just why, after all these years, have you moved the ceremony to the west front of the Capitol? And he said, well, it just became a tradition to have it on the east front. And besides, for so many decades in our history, the west side of the Capitol was filled with houses and streets and a lot of swamp, too. But after a time, it became a tradition to have it on the east side. Now, facing the west, of course, the president-elect will be looking out toward the country. And that's kind of particularly symbolic when you consider that this president comes from his adopted state of California. So he'll be looking from east to west, across the Midwest where he was born, and on out to the state where he attained political fame, and of course fame as a film star. They're approaching the Capitol now, and then we'll make that right turn onto the East Capitol Plaza. And as we said, here on the platform, why the Senate and the House have already gathered. We noticed before, I don't want to put panic now into our producers and directors, but some interesting sartorial displays. Barry Goldwater was wearing a sort of cowboy hat. Lynn Nofziger, who is noted for his sort of disdain for fancy clothing, was wearing a suit. I believe it was a three-piece suit, but it was not the club coat and the very fancy grand outfit that the rest of them have been ordered to adopt for the day. So they're on the East Capitol Plaza. The band is playing the Stars and Stripes Forever behind us here, the United States Marine Corps Band. That band has been officially involved in all of these presidential inaugurations since James Monroe's inauguration, I believe, in 1809. So tradition is being upheld. See the Secret Service galloping along. Actually, that's a slow jog for them. Sometimes they have to move much faster than that. They're going to go into the Law Library entrance. And I believe that Ann Compton is at the Law Library entrance and will describe for us there from a closer vantage point just what takes place. And they're coming to you.
Frank, they have cleared the driveway here as limousine number 1 rolls up, and what an historic moment. No president before probably ever arriving at the Capitol to surrender the reins of power with quite so much going on in the world concerning him. But here in this area, the Carter aides wearing their radios and their Secret Service buttons for the last time. Double phalanx of Secret Service agents, of course, for the 2 chief executives or chief executive to be. President Carter now shaking hands with the dignitaries here. As you can see, the president not wearing the same kind of formal outfit that President-elect Reagan is. They are forming for not really a photo out here, but hurrying inside. No telling what the conversation was in the limousine, but no sign of real distress on any of their faces. Certainly the hostages in their mind, but they are now inside the building on their way to holding rooms, while Mrs. Carter out here, Mrs. Reagan in red, waiting to take their places inside. The last poignant moments for the Carters, exchanging Mrs. Carter handing off a coat to Senator Byrd to hold for her while she proceeds inside. It must be a very poignant moment for the Carters as they go into what they know was their last ride in official vehicles as the first family. Frank?
Yes, Ann, thank you very much. And you notice that the president and the president-elect separated at that point. The president-elect is being escorted now by Senator Hatfield to room EF-100. Not that that means a great deal to you, but that is more or less a holding room where he will wait until he has given the signal to come out and go down quite a few stairs, actually, about 35 stairs. He'll walk through the crypt, which originally was intended to be George Washington's burial place. But they finally decided that just would not work. They had a large hole dug in the crypt, and they were supposed to inter Washington's remains there. But they discovered that the air was coming up and ruining the paintings and so forth that were around, so they just finally filled it in. But then And the president has been escorted to another room by the Sergeant-at-Arms and Speaker O'Neill. So they are now separate and will not meet again until they come together on the platform when the president-elect is due to take the oath of office. Our coverage of Inauguration 81 will continue in just a moment.
Roger, you have talents I never dreamed of.
Valerie, wait till you taste my coffee. And chocolate souffle.
Maxwell House is coffee you can count on. Maxwell House, good to the last drop.
When your coffee has to be great, count on Maxwell House. Always good to the last drop.
This coffee's so good. Mind if I skip dessert?
Oh, well, if you must.
Good to the last drop, Maxwell House.
It's getting harder to make ends meet, even in the meat business. I'm taking home more chicken these days, too. And plenty of shake and bake coating mix. A dried-up budget is no excuse for dried-out chicken. Not when shake and bake turns out crispy, juicy chicken that really tastes special. Like this. When you're on a budget, remember the chicken. And don't forget to shake and bake.
To get your money's worth.
We're here with the premier of Vlastovia at this typical American farm where he's taking a tour today, and he's asking about the farmer's pickup. The interpreter tells him that it's an 81 Ford. The premier wants to drive the Ford.
Yes, how good as guess mileage.
Well, Ford is the only pickup with estimated MPG this high and 2,500 pounds payload. What?
Says your American roads are rough.
Well, Fords are built tough. How do you like the Ford, Mr. Premier?
It's like my wife. Tough, but very good looking.
Open your eyes. My hair feels soft again. Open your eyes. My hair looks healthy again. Open your eyes to the gentleness of Johnson's. Now I use Johnson's baby shampoo. Its no more tears formula means gentleness. It won't strip hair dry or leave it oily. Johnson's gives my hair a clean, soft, healthy look.
Johnson's baby shampoo, only from Johnson & Johnson.
Open your eyes to the gentleness of Johnson's.
We are only a few minutes away now from the formal opening of the ceremonies, which is marked by the arrival of some of the distinguished guests here, the First Lady-to-be, together with Mrs. Carter, and then President Carter and Vice President Mondale. I think it's worth noting at this point that President Carter is a man who, undoubtedly torn by the emotions of this moment, is also in some physical distress. Just consider, he has a broken collarbone, which can be a very painful thing to endure. He also has not really had any rest for the last couple of nights. He's been up and down in the White House, spending all this time in the Oval Office, conferring constantly and signing papers and monitoring developments in Algiers and in Tehran, issuing instructions, receiving reports. And so just consider for a moment what kind of a condition he is in at this time. He's not only exhausted, he's drained emotionally too. So we look at President Carter today and you see a man who is going through some very special and unique feelings in American history. Let's see who some of the distinguished guests are. There is the seal of the presidency on the front of the platform. And you can see there are actually supposed to be about 305 people on the platform itself. There's Paul Laxalt. He's at the lower left hand of your picture, the gray hair. There he is. And this is a day that he has looked forward to for a very long time. Behind him is a singer, I gather, who produced a gala last night that was notable for its fine moments and also for what I thought some indisputably moments of bad taste. I didn't see anything funny about a reference to El Salvador. Here's Ted Kennedy. And boy, is it St. Patrick's Day? There is Pat Moynihan, and just next to Pat Moynihan is a lady, well, Paula Hawkins, the United States Senator from Florida, who probably will be expected to vote almost opposite on every issue. Here's Bill Bradley, the United States Senator from New Jersey, the basketball player, John Stennis, and Alan Cranston, both of them now considerably lower on the rank hierarchy in the Senate. Barbara? You see any interesting people?
Well, that's Patty Davis, is that not? Yes, that's
yes.
Reagan's younger daughter. And all of the members of the kitchen cabinet were invited. They have a person just in charge of them, and they've gone to this event in special buses with champagne and wonderful box lunches. This is the high point of their life for all of these very close friends of the Reagans.
Can we go back
Here is
to
son
the lady?
Ron, who is with the Joffrey Ballet Company, who has made some rather pointed remarks about Jimmy Carter. But let's hope that he has more equanimity of spirit today.
I don't mean to interrupt. I wonder if we could just stay on this lady who is wrapped in what is obviously not a Republican cloth coat, as Richard Nixon once described his wife's raiment. This is Mrs. Loyal Davis, who is the wife and the mother, the wife of Dr. Loyal Davis, and the mother of the First Lady-to-be, Nancy Reagan's mother.
Frank, Mrs. Reagan just bought a new mink coat, but as we say, you know, some people apologize when they spend a lot of money. They feel it's a sign of the American way of life and the good life.
And the Ronnie Reagan, the ballet dancer, together with his new bride. I hope that there will be no moment here where he lives up to what that remark he made some time ago about he wouldn't shake hands with President Carter. I doubt that will actually take place. Here's Maureen Reagan, who is certainly one of the most vivacious and bouncy is the word, I think, for Maureen Reagan, who has already announced that she's going to consider running for the Senate. Barry Goldwater, I wish he'd put on his cowboy hat to give you an idea of just the way he appeared. I don't know that he's all dressed up. Oh, look at these grand fellows. My goodness, all the medals. Well, you can see, hey, there's Happy Rockefeller. Barbara, you were telling me that Happy wanted to come here, Mrs. Rockefeller, in order to represent Nelson, and also, I think you said, Nelson's point of view.
Yes, that's right, Frank. Originally, she wasn't sure that she was going to come. She just decided late last week. And
Well,
her
good
husband,
for
who
her.
was a liberal Republican, she felt that his memory, his point of view should be represented.
Here is John Tower, who does not exactly fit the category of liberal Republican, but he is the new chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. It was thought for some time that perhaps he might get the post of Secretary of Defense. But that went to Cap Weinberger, Cap the Knife, as he is known. I'm not sure that the members of the incoming president's cabinet have yet come out. Well, they're just about all here. Here is Sam Hayakawa. We'll say sayonara to him for just a moment and continue our coverage of Inauguration 81 after this from our local stations.
Wednesday, the taxi guys take a mountain vacation.
Something ate all our food. We're gonna die.
And end up in a mountain of trouble. And on So, what did Maggie do to straighten out Jody?
There was no one. Oh, watch out! What?
And does Danny by the farm? Then, a mystery in Vegas.
No murder weapon?
B, witnesses a killing.
No victim?
But when Dan checks it out,
no bloodstains.
There's not a trace of foul play.
What does the future hold for you? It won't be blank if you learn to drive a tractor-trailer. For 11 years, North American Training Academy has trained men and women to be tractor-trailer drivers, and they can train you too. North American Training Academy is approved for the training of veterans. For further information, call now. In the Nashville area, call 366-1071. In all other areas of Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama, call toll-free 1-800-453-8800. Call now. Our graduates go places.
Don't want to buy a Curtis Mathis TV just yet? Okay, rent one instead. That's right, rent. And enjoy the same Curtis Mathis quality you'd get if you'd bought. Choose from consoles, portables, home entertainment centers, all with 100% modular design. What you don't get is a long-term obligation. Curtis Mathis, the most expensive television in America. And now you can rent it.
$10 delivers. Call now, 333-0300 for immediate delivery.
Outlaws try to rob the Cartwright's timber business and escape on a paddle wheel steamboat. See if they get away at 4 o'clock on Bonanza.
You're watching WNGE TV2 Nashville.
I believe they've already gone on by, but I think I caught a flash of red just behind there, and that should be Mrs. Reagan and Mrs. Carter. Mrs. Mondale and Mrs. Bush were escorted by wives of Senate and House leaders. And as soon as they are seated, there's Mrs. Mondale now.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Moves out of that lovely old gingerbread house on Massachusetts Avenue, designated as the Vice President's residence. Here is Mrs. Reagan coming out now with Mrs. Carter. She's just been announced. Barbara, this is a sight, isn't it?
It really is to see them. There was some comment during the campaign about whether Mrs. Bush, whose hair is snow white, should dye her hair. She was telling us the last time we talked. She's 55, Mrs. Reagan is 57, and Mrs. Bush had to make the decision during the campaign, and she decided to leave it as it is. Nancy Reagan looking very beautiful. The fashion designers, Frank, are very happy about all of the clothes because they feel that it's going to mean a great deal to their industry, that there's this kind of dressing up.
Well, yes, I guess this is a great day for the fashion designers. If there's going to be a Nancy look and a Nancy hairdo and all that other jazz that is usually associated with our celebration of celebrities, Mrs. Bush in, well, I guess I'd call that, is that just a vivid blue, eh?
You told me you weren't going to give any fashion notes, and you're stealing my thunder.
Maybe it's purple.
It's a Bill Blass blue coat. We understand. And as we said, Mrs. Carter just said she bought hers.
We have a report. Barbara, excuse me. I'm just told that the Associated Press reports that the hostages are leaving the airport. Now, we can't go any further than that on that report, but it comes to us from Associated Press. I don't know whether it's filed. It must be filed from Tehran. And they say that the hostages are leaving the airport. Imagine that. We are within half an hour of the transition of power. Barbara?
You know, Frank, when you were talking a moment or two ago about Jimmy Carter, as we look at the Reagan family, he's only 56 years old and still has a long life ahead of him, one hopes. Talks about becoming a writer, in which case he will join most of the ex-presidents. The majority became writers after they left office. Truman, Eisenhower, Johnson, Nixon, and Ford. And by the way, neither President Nixon or President Ford, they both were invited, neither wanted to come. They said it was Ronald Reagan's day.
The band is playing the Marine hymn. Here is Andrews Air Force Base now, and the people you see there are waiting, I believe, to board a plane that will fly to Rhein-Main Air Force Base in West Germany. We're back at the Capitol now. But there is another signal, another clear indication that this long traumatic hostage crisis for 444 days is coming to an end. This is the party that is supposed to go to meet the hostages in at the hospital there in West Germany. The president and the president-elect. They're coming out now, so we're going to go to our correspondent there on the platform, and Sam Donaldson. Sam?
Well, Frank, we're all anticipating now the moment when the President of the United States and the President-elect will come through this doorway on the west front, walk down the red carpet to the special platform, and the transfer of power will be made. As you've observed, the members of the Congress are here, the diplomatic corps. I don't think you can see him, but our only living general of the armies, Omar Bradley, is here. All of the distinguished people that you might think of, and many of those whose faces are familiar, but you can't remember their names, are on the platform. As you have pointed out, Frank, we have several reports, but they are unconfirmed, apparently, that the hostages may, in fact, be leaving Iran even now. And perhaps we'll have an opportunity when the President of the United States comes down here past us to see whether he's heard the same reports. It's a beautiful day in Washington, and I think that everyone is very happy on the platform. Obviously, the Democrats aren't as happy as the Republicans, but they're certainly not sore losers about it. You can see that when I made that remark, a lot of people around me began to clap and cheer, and I recognize some of them as being Democrats. Looking up toward the interior of the building, I have yet to see Mr. Carter and Mr. Reagan appear. But there is great movement up there, Secret Service agents and other members. I do see Vice President Mondale coming down now. He will be the first one to come through the door, along with the Vice President-elect. And I think he's being introduced now.
Sam, here comes the president.
Yes, you're
now.
right, Frank. I couldn't see him.
Yes.
Here he comes.
Here comes the last hail to the chief of the
he's walking down the steps. The last time he's going to hear "Hail to the Chief" played for him. He's accompanied by the Vice President. And We'll see if he's heard about the hostages. Here he comes. Mr. President, are the hostages out?
Can't say yes.
Not yet. Not yet. Is that what he said, Frank? I couldn't hear it.
Not yet.
Not yet. Not yet. They've cheated him. They've cheated him right down to the end. I understand, Frank, and I must tell you that I cannot tell you why I understand that the planes had been sitting at the end of the runway literally for several hours this morning. I can only assume that the hostages were aboard, but that the Iranians would not let them go. They would not let them go. I'm not quite certain what the restraint was. Maybe there was an Iranian fighter in the air.
Yes, well...
Something like that. I think that is my understanding. In any event, they wouldn't let them go.
Well, Sam, you understand we were able to report an Associated Press dispatch that the planes have taken off, but we're unable to confirm it. And the dispatch was, as I understand it, filed from Tehran. Hopefully it was from somebody who actually saw the planes lift off in the air.
All right, but the president hadn't received that word.
Oh,
that's
right.
perfectly possible that even with instantaneous communication with the press of this inaugural day, he had not yet received the confirmation. But I'm certain that if he had, he would have told us, because he would like nothing better to be able to report that it ended on his watch. And his watch is about to end.
Well, he's gazing out over the... talking now with the Chief Justice and Potter Stewart, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, who will administer the oath to Vice President-elect George Bush. Chief
now,
Justice
Frank, just about to be announced is the President-elect.
Of the United States, George Bush.
That is the Vice President-elect. George Bush in his morning coat.
Well, he's got the momentum now, hasn't he, Sam?
Saying hello to old friends here. Margaret Heckler from the House of Representatives, with whom he served many years ago.
Frank, we understand that Ronald Reagan will be sworn in with the Bible that belonged to his late mother, Nellie Reagan.
I see.
Frank, I think the laughter around here was for something else other than what Barbara said, because they cannot hear our programming, and there was something around me that occurred just at that moment.
Do you have any idea what it was? Maybe he wanted to go up to get the microphone, and somebody said, "That's not your microphone, Mr. Bush."
I don't know. I've hit about 2 out of 3 here, looking up the steps. I hesitate to say it, but I think I see the President-elect getting in position.
Well, don't hesitate to say it, Sam. I think you'd recognize him.
Well, that's true, but my eyesight is not as good as it was when I was younger, Frank, and it's rather dim in there. I'll give all sorts of excuses for misidentifying the fact that it was the Vice President-elect and not the President-elect who was about to come out. The last time I made an attempt.
Sam,
but I think they're about ready now.
Yes.
At least everyone else thinks so, and I'll go along with the crowd in this case.
Well, I'm going to point out, whether anybody likes it or not, that you too have been up for more than 48 hours, for 72 hours, really, without any sleep. Well, and I'm amazed that you're on your feet, really.
Down at the White House, Frank,
here he comes.
The President and all of his associates spent 2 sleepless nights except for cat naps. Yeah. This morning, for instance, in the Oval Office, all the associates waiting after they received word that the funds had been transferred. Hamilton Jordan, I understand, took a nap. When he woke up, President Carter kidded him. He said, "Well, Ham, I've just been talking to the head of the Bank of England," and Jordan snores, you see. And he said, "I've just been talking to the Bank of England. He asked me if they were vacuuming the Oval Office." I don't think Jordan snores that loudly, but it kind of relieved the tension, I suppose.
Sam, can we, I'd like to hear from Ted Koppel before the President-elect comes out. Ted, can you come in and give us any late information on the hostages?
Yes, I can, Frank. What's happening, and this will mean a lot more, I suppose, to journalists out there, UPI has just gone with a flash, which is, in effect, the highest, the most important notification of news that they can give. The last time they did it was with the Kennedy assassination. It's 2 words. It says, "Hostages freed." No more details from UPI. AP, as you have been reporting for several minutes now, has said that a plane carrying the 52 American hostages took off from Tehran's Mehrabad airport. They are attributing that to a policeman at the airport who is alleged to have told that to reporters, but we have no independent confirmation yet. Frank?
Okay, Ted, thank you very much. We're waiting now for the President-elect to come really down a rather long flight of stairs. I think I counted them the other day, about 35 or so, from the main floor of the Capitol. And there he is. You see him almost lost in the crowd. When he comes out, or just before, the Army herald trumpets will give him a salute.
The President-elect of the United States, Ronald Wilson Reagan.
Well, there they are. What a long, long journey to this point. Senator Hatfield will now take over as the chairman of the Congressional Inaugural Committee and will present the Reverend Don B. Mumaw, who will give the invocation. It'll take a little time for them to be settled down there. Dr. Mumaw is the pastor of the Bel Air Presbyterian Church. He is, if he looks like a football player, that's because he was one. He was a linebacker for UCLA.
Senator Mark Hatfield,
and Senator Hatfield's being introduced now.
The Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies will present the program.
Welcome to the historic first inauguration under the panoply of the West Front of our nation's capital. The 40th President of the United States takes his oath of office in a day when a tide of new hope is rising throughout our land. As an affirmation of this new hope, let us all join Michael Ryan of the United States Marines in singing a verse of America the Beautiful. Will you all join and reach out and grasp the hand of your neighbor, and let this be a symbol of our unity. Would you come forward?
Skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed His grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining Oh, beautiful, for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America, God mend
to tell you about a little vignette that we were unable to show because we were actually watching, of course, the Marine sing the America the Beautiful. But during that performance, Mrs. Carter stepped across the aisle and gripped Mrs. Reagan's hand for just about 30 seconds or so.
This new hope is
Beautiful
not
gesture.
promoted in lyricism, but is tough and realistic hope, which is the instinct of the soul, the energizer of the mind. For our invocation today, I present President-elect and Mrs. Reagan's pastor, the Reverend Don Mumma of the Bel Air Presbyterian Church in Los Angeles. Will you please stand?
Wherever you might be, here and in the United States and around the world, please bow with me in this moment of solemn dedication and prayer. Gracious God our Father, we need you today, maybe as never before. We have not lived up to our personal or national potential. We have seen our world from our own selfish, parochial point of view. We have lived as though everything depended upon us. We confess our sin and seek your forgiveness. In this historic moment, we would pray for our President-elect, Ronald Reagan. May he see himself as one who has been called by you to lead this country. May he take very seriously his accountability to you and do all he can to walk in your truth, run with patience the race that is set before him, and stand mature and wholly devoted to doing your will. Grant him a steady peace, a brave and compassionate heart, a single desire to always be quick to give you all the praise and the honor and glory. Help and encourage Mrs. Reagan and the children in these days. Teach them, O God, to understand that with responsibility comes sacrifice, and with leadership comes loneliness. May they all find their companionship in you, O God. We also pray for Vice President-elect George Bush, the cabinet, and all others who are in positions of leadership in this new administration. May they measure well the shortness of time and the length of eternity. May they see all people and things and nations from your point of view. We thank you, O God, for this moment of commitment. Give to all of us as a nation enough hard times to keep us humble and humane, enough tasks beyond our own abilities to keep us ever dependent upon you, enough joys and accomplishments to keep us pressing on and gloriously happy as we serve you together. We thank you, O God, for the release of the hostages, and for all of those who have made this moment possible. And so in this moment of new beginnings, our hearts beat with a cadence of pride in our country and hope in its future. Help us to stand proudly as American citizens and face every challenge with a confidence born of your spirit and humbly touched by your love and grace. So to this end we commit ourselves, and to this end we pray. In the name of the Lord of Lords and King of Kings, even Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.
Please be seated. My fellow citizens, will you please join me at this time in wishing good health and happiness to President and Mrs. Carter and to Vice President and Mrs. Mondale.
President and the Vice President, to tell you that the pastor's reference to the release of the hostages, while we hope it is true, we cannot absolutely confirm it as yet. He did thank God for the release of the hostages at this moment. We also can tell you that if we do get confirmation before the President-elect takes the oath, that announcement will be made by a Carter spokesman who will still be a representative of the United States government. If after 12 noon, it will come from a Reagan spokesman. Now we're going to hear, I believe, God of Our Fathers by the Marine Band.
I now present the Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, the Honorable Potter Stewart, who will administer the oath of office to the Vice President-elect.
You put your left hand on the Bible, raise your right hand, and repeat after me. I, George Herbert Walker Bush.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I take this obligation freely.
That I take this obligation freely.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
That I will well and faithfully discharge.
That I will well and faithfully discharge.
The duties of the office.
The duties of the office.
On which I am about to enter.
On which I am about to enter.
So help you God.
So help me God.
God bless you, George.
Thank you.
God bless you, both.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
This is the official song of salute to the Vice President. It is rarely heard, but it is a very, very stirring song. Great melody. He stumbled just slightly once there during the oath-taking. You might point out that the Vice President is not wearing the de rigueur costume. He's got a dark suit on, but not the club coat.
The United States Marine Band will now play our national hymn, God of Our Fathers.
a tremendous backdrop for the playing of our national hymn, God of Our Fathers, as we were able to move around Washington and show you some of the monuments that so beautify this city and typify this country's history. Senator Hatfield again.
My fellow citizens, I now present the Chief Justice of the United States, the Honorable Warren Burger, who will administer the oath of office to the President-elect.
Governor, are you prepared to take the constitutional oath?
I am.
If you place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand and repeat after me, I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Now, I congratulate you, sir.
And the 21-gun salute roars out for President Reagan. His first hail to the chief. That's all there is to it. What a great story, what a tremendous thing it is, the passage of power, just because of a few spoken words that reflect, of course, the spoken word of the people. The former President Carter steps forward to shake hands with President Reagan and the new First Lady. The guns continue to roar. May they be only heard symbolically during his term. Inaugural address.
My fellow countrymen, the President of the United States. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Senator Hatfield, Mr. Chief Justice, Mr. President, Vice President Bush, Vice President Mondale, Senator Baker, Speaker O'Neill, Reverend Mumaw, and my fellow citizens. To a few of us here today, this is a solemn and most momentous occasion. And yet in the history of our nation, it is a commonplace occurrence. The orderly transfer of authority as called for in the Constitution routinely takes place as it has for almost 2 centuries, and few of us stop to think how unique we really are. In the eyes of many in the world, this every 4-year ceremony we accept as normal is nothing less than a miracle. Mr. President, I want our fellow citizens to know how much you did to carry on this tradition. By your gracious cooperation in the transition process, you have shown a watching world that we are a united people, pledged to maintaining a political system which guarantees individual liberty to a greater degree than any other. And I thank you and your people for all your help in maintaining the continuity which is the